Serafina Vale had learned a long time ago that the best way to survive in a world that did not want you was to make yourself very small. Small voice, small steps, small expectations. She had folded herself down so many times that she almost forgot there had once been a version of her who took up space without apology. That version had died the night Caius Vane laughed at her tears. She had felt something that evening, a faint, warm pull in her chest, like a thread being drawn taut. She had turned, heart uncertain but open, and found Caius standing across the great hall of the Ironwood packhouse, looking at her, with an expression that started as surprise and finished as something close to amusement. He had glanced at his friends beside him. Then he had laughed. Not cruelly. That almost would have been better. He laughed the way people laugh at something small and accidental. A stumble, a spilled drink, something easily forgotten. She had pressed her hand to her mouth and walked out alone. 18 months later, she was carrying a tray of water glasses through the grand corridors of Ashenhold, and telling herself she had forgotten all of it. Ashenhold was a mountain estate, built from gray stone and old purpose. Every 3 years it became the seat of the Grand Alpha Council, a gathering of every pack leader on the continent, their families, their chosen mates, and at the very edges of the event, their serving staff. Serafina had come as part of Ironwood Pack's roster. She had not been asked, her name had simply appeared on the list, and she had understood immediately that Mira Ashford, Caius's chosen mate, had arranged it. Better to have her somewhere visible and controllable than somewhere unseen and worrying. So Serafina carried trays. She poured water. She kept her eyes at a polite, practiced angle, just below direct contact, and she moved through rooms full of powerful people, like a current of air, present enough to be useful, quiet enough to be ignored. She was good at this. That was the worst part. She had become genuinely good at disappearing. On the first morning of the council, she was working the breakfast service in the main hall when the room changed. It was not a sound. It was a shift in the air, a pressure drop, like the moment before a storm arrives, and every living thing goes still without knowing why. Serafina paused at the end of a long table, water pitcher in hand, and watched 3 alphas near the entrance go rigid with a respect that looked almost involuntary. The Alpha King had arrived. She had heard of Zaylin Duskmore the way everyone had, in pieces, in stories, in the careful, lowered voices people used when discussing things they did not fully understand. He had not attended a council in 4 years. No one seemed to know exactly why he had come to this one. He walked into the hall without announcement and without apparent concern for the effect of his arrival. He was tall, dark-haired, dressed without decoration. He had gray eyes with a quality she could not name at that distance, not cold, but deep, the kind of eyes that took time to understand. His gaze moved across the room in a slow, methodical way, surveying, calculating, then it stopped. Serafina did not see this. She had already turned back to Elder Lysa Grant, a tiny, ancient she-wolf with bright eyes and opinions about everything, who was tugging at her sleeve and asking for more tea and telling a story about a border argument that had happened before Serafina was born. Elder Lysa, however, saw the king stop. She looked at Serafina and then looked at the king, and then, very quietly, she picked up her cup and said nothing at all. The first day passed in the rhythm Serafina had built for herself. Sessions of formal politics in the main chamber, meals in the great hall, corridors full of movement and negotiation. She worked through all of it, steady and careful, and she noticed very little except what was immediately in front of her. Except once. In a side corridor, escaping the noise for a private 45 seconds, as she sometimes allowed herself, she stood with her back to the stone wall, and her eyes closed. Her wolf, that quiet, grief-dulled part of her that had barely stirred in months, moved, a slow, uncertain press against her ribs, like something waking. She opened her eyes. Zaylin Duskmore was standing at the corridor's intersection 12 feet away, speaking quietly to one of his guards. He was not looking at her. Then he was. A moment passed between them that had no clear name. He gave the smallest nod, almost formal, oddly courteous, and then turned the corner and was gone. Her wolf did not settle for the rest of the afternoon. On the second day, She was sent to deliver sealed documents to a meeting room in the East Wing. The room was empty, the meeting relocated elsewhere. She set the papers on the table and turned to leave and found the king in the doorway. They were both caught off guard, though he showed it far less. She moved to pass, and her wolf surged, sudden, overwhelming, and her step faltered. His hand came out, not grabbing, just a steadying touch at her elbow, and then it dropped immediately. "Are you all right?" His voice was low and direct, no performance in it. "Yes, I apologize, Your Majesty." She straightened and pushed her wolf firmly down. He looked at her. Not the way alphas usually looked at omegas, measuring their use, or dismissing them without thought. He looked at her the way you look at something you are trying to place. Something that feels familiar in a way you cannot yet explain. "You're from Ironwood Pack," he said. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Vane's pack." "Yes." Something passed briefly across his expression and was gone. He stepped aside, and she walked away with her wolf making noise in her chest for the next 2 hours. That evening, clearing dishes from the high table during the formal dinner, she heard Mira lean toward Caius and whisper words that were not quite quiet enough. "Why is she even here?" "It's embarrassing." Caius said something low in response. A sound of management. She could not make out the words. Serafina carried the dishes to the kitchen and washed her hands for longer than necessary, and told herself it did not matter, and mostly believed it. Unable to sleep that night, she slipped out to the courtyard garden behind Ashenhold's east face. It was half wild, full of stone fountains and roses so dark they looked black in the moonlight. Nobody used it after midnight. She sat on the edge of a fountain and let her wolf come forward just a little, just enough to breathe. Her wolf was not broken. She understood that now, in the way you understand something you have been avoiding. It had not gone dormant. It had been grieving. There was a difference. She heard the stone door open. She stood immediately. Zaylin Duskmore came to a stop 5 feet from her. He was without his guards. Something about him was quieter out here. Still composed, but more real. Less performed. "I could not sleep," he said. It was not quite an explanation. It was closer to an honesty. She should have excused herself and gone inside. "The fountains here are very old," she said instead, and immediately felt that this was perhaps the least impressive thing she had ever said aloud. But he crossed to the fountain and looked at it with genuine interest. 12th century, built when Ashenhold was a monastery. He glanced at her. "You knew that?" "I read the estate history in the staff room. There was not much else to do." The corner of his mouth moved. It was not a smile, exactly. It was the idea of one. They stood beside the fountain for a long time without saying much, and it was the most comfortable Serafina had felt in a year and a half, which she carefully did not examine. On the morning of the 3rd day, the Grand Chamber filled for the Open Council, the largest formal session of the summit, attended by every alpha, every entourage, every mate, and the senior serving staff arranged along the walls. Declarations were made here. Oaths were witnessed. Anything an alpha wished to place before the full collective was spoken here and recorded. Serafina was stationed at the refreshment table along the side wall. Elder Lysa had requested her station specifically, which Serafina suspected had less to do with refreshments and more to do with the old woman's preference for someone quiet to sit beside. The session opened. Territorial agreements, trade declarations, an arbitration brought before the collective from 2 northern packs. Caius Vane made a strong case for Ironwood's border expansion, polished and confident, and Mira watched him from the gallery with open pride. Serafina poured water and thought about fountains. The king's chair at the center of the raised dais sat empty at the session's opening, as was custom. He arrived last, and the room rose without being told to. He took his seat, and the session continued. His eyes moved once across the chamber in that slow, precise way of his. She was looking at her water pitchers when it happened. She did not see it. Elder Lysa did. The old woman was very still for a moment. Then she reached for her glass. The session moved into the declaration portion. One alpha, then another, then another. Procedural, expected, recorded. Then King Zaylin set down his pen. The room noticed. It always noticed when he moved. He did not stand to speak. He rarely did. His voice carried without effort, and the room had always gone quiet enough to receive it. "I have a declaration," he said. Silence arrived like a held breath. 15 months ago, I consulted the Moon Quarter records. Old lineage tracking from before the pack reorganization. I had reason to believe a bond thread had gone unrecognized due to long proximity absence. He paused. The records gave me cause to search. I searched. Another pause. Brief, deliberate. I found her. The chamber did not erupt into noise. It erupted into the particular silence that is heavier than noise. 73 alphas processing the same impossible word at the same moment. Seraphina Vale, of Ironwood Pack, Moon Quarter lineage. Every head turned, toward the side wall, toward the refreshment table, toward the young woman in the plain gray uniform who had gone completely still with a water pitcher in her hand. Elder Lysa put her hand on Seraphina's arm. Her voice was soft and certain. "Go, child. That has been coming since the moment he walked into this room." Seraphina set the pitcher down. She walked forward. It was perhaps 30 feet from the side wall to the center of the council floor. She was aware of every single face in the chamber. She was aware of Caius in the front section, no longer relaxed in his chair. She was aware of Mira in the gallery, very still in the way of someone who has composed themselves so tightly that the effort is visible. She stopped in front of the dais. Zaylin stood then. The room registered this. The Alpha King standing for a person was not a small gesture. He came down the 2 steps of the dais and stood on the council floor level with her. "The Moon Quarter bond does not activate on a first meeting," he said, to the room but looking at her. "It does not respond to status or proximity. It responds to character. The wolf must see the person, not the position." He held her gaze. "My wolf saw you on the first morning. You were pouring tea." She found her voice from wherever it had gone. "You could have told me this privately." "I could have." He did not look away. "I chose not to. Because you were brought here as a servant by a pack that treated you as less than you are. Because there are 73 alphas in this room who would have found a quiet, procedural way to make this smaller than it is." Something tightened in his jaw. "I do not make things smaller than they are." From the direction of Caius Vane came the sound of a chair shifting, a breath drawn sharply. She looked at Zaylin. This man who had found her name in records no one else had thought to look at, who had talked about monasteries in a midnight garden, who had looked at her, every single time, like she was worth looking at. Her wolf was not surging or rioting or pressing frantically at her ribs. Her wolf was perfectly still, the way water is still when it has finally found level ground. "All right," she said. It was not a declaration. It was just a word. It was just yes. Something in his expression opened, not apart, open, like a window in a room that has been closed too long. He spoke the old words then, the Moon Quarter acknowledgement that her grandmother had told her about in stories she had half believed and half dismissed. He spoke them in front of all of them, and when the last word settled, she felt it, deep and quiet and completely certain, the feeling of something returning that she had not known she was missing. The chamber found its voice again slowly. Murmurs, movement, the sound of 73 conversations beginning at once. Caius was on his feet. His face held an expression she had never seen on him before, the specific look of a man watching his own certainty rearrange itself into something he cannot manage. He had been so certain about her. Certain she was small, certain she was forgettable, certain his laughter that night had landed on something that did not matter. He was not laughing now. Mira stood quietly, gathered her things quietly, and sat back down with a composure that looked like it was costing her a great deal. Elder Lysa, back at the side wall, finished her water with the satisfaction of someone who has waited a long time to be proven right. Zaylin brought Seraphina to the dais. She stood beside his chair, the chair at the center of everything, and watched the council settle itself back into procedure, and she felt, for the first time in a very long time, that she was standing somewhere she was allowed to be. He stood beside her, and they spoke quietly under the noise of the chamber. "You read the estate history pamphlet too," she said. "Did you not?" A pause. "The fountains are 12th century. I knew it." The corner of his mouth moved again. This time it went all the way. 2 days later, Mira left Ashenhold early. Caius stayed, because he had obligations he could not leave behind. He did not approach Serafina. He stood in corridors sometimes and watched her pass with an expression that had no clean name, the expression of someone understanding, too late, the weight of what they once found easy to dismiss. On the last evening, Elder Lysa took tea with Serafina in a small sitting room off the main hall and told her about the moon quarter bonds in the old days, how they were considered the truest kind, the ones where the soul recognized what the eyes had not yet learned to see. Caius Vane's eyes, the old woman said plainly, were never his strongest quality. Serafina laughed, a real laugh, open and unguarded and surprised out of her. The kind she had forgotten lived in her chest. Down the corridor, Zaylen heard it. He did not stop walking. But his steps slowed, just barely, the way a person slows when they want to hold a moment a little longer, before moving past it. On the final morning, she was in the courtyard again. The iron rose garden, the old stone fountains, the light coming in low and golden over the mountain edge. She had come to stand in it one more time before everything changed. Zaylen found her there, and neither of them pretended it was accidental anymore. "You do not have to return with me immediately," he said. "This has been a great deal to take in. I know I put you in front of a room full of people without warning. You did. I would do it again. I know." She looked at the roses. "I think I would have wanted you to." They stood in the garden as it moved from gold to ordinary morning light. "I don't know very much about you yet," she said. "No. I know you don't sleep well. I know you find formal politics exhausting. I know you have read the estate history pamphlet. That is more than most people know." She looked at him. He looked back. Her wolf was that same deep, settled stillness, the feeling of a window opened after a winter spent entirely indoors. "I am not going to be easy," she said. "I spent a long time making myself very small, and I have not yet sorted out all of my feelings about that. I am not looking for easy." "What are you looking for?" He was quiet for a moment, not uncertain, thinking carefully, the way he always seemed to think, with full attention, without hurry. "Someone my wolf recognized," he said. "I found her holding a teapot." Serafina looked down at her empty hands. Then she laughed again, soft and real, and entirely her own. Zaylen watched her the way people watch things they have spent a long time searching for, with the quiet disbelief of finally. In the garden, with the roses catching light and the old fountains running, and the mountain holding them both in its shadow, something that had been broken for a long time began, without ceremony, to be otherwise.